coming back home, and it is July the 1st, and that means cuts to penalty rates for some fast food, pharmacy, retail and hospitality workers comes into force. Labor leader Bill Shorten is promising to reverse those cuts if he wins the next election.
Well, for more on this and other top stories of the week, we're joined by Rebecca Burdick, Policy Manager at the New South Wales Business Chamber, and Katie Aitchison, the Chief Executive of Youth Action. Good morning to you both.
Thanks
I think starting with the penalty rates first off the bat there is probably something that is well within the remit for both of you, because we do note that, of course, there's been a lot of comment, criticism, concerns on both sides of the debate. I'll start with you, Rebecca, in terms of the business sector. It's happening. Labor says it wants to reverse those cuts, though.
Well, I guess at the current time, we're going through a pretty big period of transition in our overall economy, and the last thing business needs is more uncertainty. And I think what the Leader of the Opposition is doing at the moment is adding more uncertainty to our political narrative. The penalty rates decision was made by the Fair Work Commission. The Fair Work Commission, I think most of its membership was actually appointed by Bill Shorten. They deliberated for 40 days. They had 40 days of looking through the evidence in detail, and they didn't reach that decision lightly. So I think it's pretty disingenuous and perhaps a little bit irresponsible as well of the opposition leader now to talk about reversing that decision and creating more disruption, more uncertainty, more difficulty for small businesses in particular that we're really looking forward to getting a bit of relief here.
Okay, Rebecca, what's it going to mean for someone who works on a Sunday?
Well, particularly for young people in entry-level jobs, you know, often hospitality is a great place to start your career. And so the very few entry-level jobs we have left in Australia often are in the industries where penalty rates are applied. So young people are disproportionately affected by that because they're starting their careers, they have less sort of skill development over the time, they haven't been working for as long. And so it's massively impacting on young people. And so the argument was really about it's going to create more jobs. Business says it's going to create more jobs, but that's really contested. The evidence really isn't there. If we want to create more jobs, particularly for young people, we need to look at the things that work, like wage subsidies for employers to get more young people in.
Well, you wouldn't have any dispute from me about wage subsidies for employers, because absolutely that can be a real circuit breaker for generating more jobs in the market. But I think the evidence is definitely there that this penalty rate reform will create more jobs. It will mean that mum and dad chicken shops and cafe owners can put out their shingle on a Sunday and perhaps give a young person or a student, a 4 or 5 hour shift on a Sunday that wouldn't have been available previously. I think what we've seen over the past 20 years is that unemployment overall has been trending down, which is fantastic for those of us who have jobs, but youth unemployment has been going up. So in some parts of Australia, I think it reaches about 24%. If we're looking at getting more young people into an entry-level job, more young people getting work experience, then I think that we need to create the right conditions for business so that they can give them those opportunities. And that's what this review is going to do, this reform is going to do.
If it was about, I would completely agree with you if it was about secure jobs and, you know, secure and equitable wages. But that's not what we're looking at. By saying that we're going to cut the wages that are for the smallest job, like the smallest wages that we have in the industry, we're going to cut more of that money. That's like $115 a week for a young person. That's their rent.
But then shouldn't we really be criticising the big corporations who, by the way, have secured enterprise agreements negotiated by the union, so union-backed enterprise agreements, where they're paying their employees, I think, $6 less in some cases than the award wage. I'm here as a representative of the New South Wales Business Chamber. We have more than 20,000 businesses as members, and something like 90% of our membership are small businesses, and they are really crying out for some relief from the costs of wages.
It is a passionate debate that is only going to kick on, given that Labor leader Bill Shorten has decided to add that to his quiver when it comes to talking about elections. We are, in fact, already early this morning talking about the stepping forward to elections, which is a little bit too early for me, I think, at this stage. But let's talk about stamp duty, because, of course, that's also something that's come into effect as of the 1st of July. We've spoken earlier with Tim McGibbon with the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales, who has been talking through some of the pros and cons. There are obviously targeting first home buyers a good thing for housing affordability?
Look, I mean, we've been asking for tax reform for a really long time. Everyone knows in Australia that housing is just unaffordable, that we're seeing increases that are just exponential, not in line with wages. We need to do something. So the government has, in their last budget, was trying to do something. We see both sides of politics sort of saying these things. Stamp duty is a small, I mean, in New South Wales, we saw sort of cuts to under, like stamp duty is being erased for under $650,000 houses. But tell me where those houses are, because the average house in Sydney is $1 million. So where is that $650,000 house that you can get rid of stamp duty on?
I'd love to find it.
Yeah, that's for sure. Like, the young people would love that. But I think it really is these small tokenistic things is like trying to bail out the Titanic with a teacup, going, well, we'll get rid of this one thing. It's not actually going to make a difference to housing affordability.
Yeah, I mean, Rebecca, as far as that affordability, we keep hearing from, like, even the Real Estate Institute this morning was saying it's a supply-demand issue. Yeah, so I mean...
Look, our general position is it is likely a supply issue, but we think, particularly in New South Wales, that we have a bit of a silver bullet, I suppose, for housing affordability, and that is, you talked about stamp duty, that is getting rid of stamp duty altogether and progressing toward a broad-based land tax. That's something that we actually researched with the union, so we had, I think, the AWU working with us on that proposal, and we also had NCOS backing that proposal as well. That's something that we've taken to the Premier here, and we really would like to see it adopted, because if you're thinking about the average house price in Sydney, I think stamp duty equates to like $50,000 at least if you're going to get a small apartment. So,
and I think particularly for first home buyers, it comes as a shock, doesn't it? Where you look
Sure
at the
does,
price of a
yes.
home,
You save up your
thinking,
deposit.
great,
Yeah.
and then comes that transaction cost.
Well, the idea that you can even save for a house, so it takes 15 years to save a deposit for a house, and it's 10 times the annual income. Whereas, even 30 years ago, it was only 3 years to save. So what are you doing in that 15 years that you're trying to save a deposit? Are you staying at home with your parents? Like, can you afford rent? I mean, rent is a whole nother part of this process that we're not even talking about. It's gone up 44% in the last decade. People are struggling to pay their rents. They're struggling to save the money for a deposit. How are they going to buy a house, particularly young people? They are seeing this dream further and further away. That it's not something that many young people think it's going to be possible in their lifetime.
And yet giving up stamp duty would mean having to, effectively dent a lot of what the state revenue is. So...
Well, I don't think that that's the case. I think we did the numbers. We had some really smart economists working with us on this project, and they actually estimated it will create another $5 billion. It'll generate another $5 billion in revenue for the overall economy.
So if you scrap that and put a land tax in there,
and move toward a broad-based land tax. Stamp duty is one of the most inefficient taxes around the system. It's something like 75 cents in the dollar that it costs, 75 cents that it costs to recover $1 of stamp duty. That is just ridiculous. If you're looking at a broad-based land tax, I think it costs about 5 cents in the dollar. So to me, it seems like a pretty easy kind of win for the government. It's not something that we want them to do overnight. We'd want them to progress toward that change.
well, particularly when what is stamp duty? What's the government doing? How are they earning that money rightfully?
Well, I guess it's, it's building a lot of bridges and roads and things like that at the moment, so we won't complain about the fact that the New South Wales government is pulling in a whole bunch of revenue, but we'd like to look at the source of that revenue and whether it's an efficient source. So.
Oh, all right. And Katie, as far as you're concerned, any other particular measures you would like to see put in place at this point to ease that affordability crisis?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's time for some really strong leadership from the state governments and from the federal government to say housing is unaffordable and it's particularly out of reach of young people. What is that going to mean for our future? If young people can't have a stable home, they're not going to stay in communities where there's jobs. If they can only afford where there is no jobs, what are we doing? We're creating more youth unemployment. This is not, we've got to do something about it, and it's got to be on the table. Tax reform, stamp duty is one part of tax reform, but what about negative gearing? Let's look at supply, let's look at big picture rather than these tokenistic small things. Let's actually deal with the issue so that we can have young people buying homes earlier.
All right. Now, Rebecca, you spoke earlier about the uncertainty that the whole debate over penalty rates is concerned, given that Bill Shorten has said he wants to scrap it. Let's take a look at the coalition this week. Now, clearly...
it's a bit of a circus at the moment.
Yeah, okay, you call it a circus. As far as business is concerned, what sort of picture does this paint for you? We talk of uncertainty. Given the ongoing stoush within the Liberal Party about leadership, perhaps we're looking at an early election, who knows?
I'm not going to tip whether we're going to have an early election or not, but what I will say is business needs to know we need to know who we're speaking with. We need to know which politicians to deal with. We need to have certainty about the policies that they're going to make. I think over the past 6 years, we have seen a merry-go-round in terms of political leadership, and that makes it really hard to do business because one day you might have a policy which supports a particular angle, if we think about penalty rates, for example, and then within 6 months that policy could be completely overturned. We need to see some long-term thinking in policy making, and that's not going to happen while we have a merry-go-round of prime ministers. So look, we've worked with all of the prime ministers. I say all because there's quite a few of them. All of the prime ministers there have been over the past sort of 7 or 8 years, and we've worked with them really productively. But I think it would be great to get some kind of certainty about having one person in the job for longer than a couple of years.
Well, disengagement with the youth has been a big problem, hasn't it, when it comes to politics?
I mean, think about a 13-year-old. They've seen 5 prime ministers and now they're able to vote at 18. And you know, this last election was really interesting. Young people are the swing vote. We saw 90,000 young people 18 to 24 enroll to vote in the 2 weeks before because they were really engaged and wanting to have a say. And yet we didn't see the politicians talking about youth issues at all. We have this complete silence about what's going on for young people from Parliament House. There's no minister for youth. There's no advocacy body that speaks into youth because they defunded it in 2014. There's no office for youth. There's no conversations about youth issues. And I think young people are frustrated with that. They're going to other places to be political. They're joining groups. They're really active, and yet they're not rusted into those old political sort of ways of doing things.
And Katie, at the same time, a big portion of the youth vote goes to the Greens. We saw a lot of turmoil within the party this week. What do you make of that?
Well, actually, really interestingly, we talked to 3,500 young people before the last election, and the spread was across all the parties. They're really issues-based. Young people care about issues. So any party that's willing to talk about the issues that they care about, they will swing to it, hence the swing vote idea. And so traditionally it's been Greens, but there's been Liberals and Labor have been picking up, and actually Independents have been picking up as well, because they start talking about the small issues. I'd love to see Labor and Liberals saying, young people said this is what we care about, and let's see how much the dial swings their way.
Right, well, it sounds like it's a virus that might be catching. We'll have to watch out and see what happens next when Parliament resumes. Katie Aitchison and Rebecca Birkin, thank you very much, both of you, for speaking to us.